Have you ever thought about how, even way back in the earliest days of history, people were already fighting huge battles? I mean, not just with armies and stuff, but like battles of
Oh,
ideals.
absolutely. It's fascinating, right?
Totally. Like how people understand the world, what they believe. I mean, that shapes everything, you know?
It's foundational. And actually, that's what we're going to be looking at today, one of the most well-known examples from ancient times.
Exactly. We're taking a deep dive into the 10 plagues of Egypt.
Now, when you hear 10 plagues, you probably picture locusts and rivers of blood, that sort of thing, right?
Right, like a series of disasters.
But the sources we're looking at today, they paint a much more complicated picture, like a real showdown on a spiritual and societal level.
Okay, so not just bad luck for the Egyptians?
No, these sources really present it as a direct confrontation between the God of the Israelites and, well, basically everything Egypt stood for.
Hmm.
All their gods, their Pharaoh.
Who, of course, was considered a god himself, right?
Exactly.
So that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're going to look at each plague through the lens of Egyptian beliefs. It seems like every single one was meant to target specifically the power and control of certain Egyptian gods.
Very deliberate, yeah.
So that's our mission today, to go through all 10 one by one and see what they tell us about this massive historical and spiritual conflict.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning with the Nile turning to blood. When you look at the sources, what stands out about this first plague?
Well, first off, I think it's important to remember just how essential the Nile was to the Egyptians.
It was everything to them, right?
It was their lifeblood, literally. Their source of food, their transportation, and it was completely tied up in their religious belief.
So many gods associated with it.
Yeah, tons. You've got Hapi, the god of the Nile itself. He was thought to control its flow and its fertility. And then there's Osiris, the god of vegetation, who was actually believed to have the Nile as his bloodstream.
Wow, so turning the Nile to blood?
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a direct attack on those fundamental life-giving forces they worshipped.
Exactly. And beyond the major players like Hapi and Osiris, you have all these other deities connected to the Nile and its ecosystem.
Like who?
Well, there's Hatmehite, a fish goddess, and Khnum, who is thought to guard the sources of the Nile, and Leith, who he paid particular attention to the biggest fish in the river.
Okay, so it wasn't just turning the water to blood. It was like targeting specific creatures in the Nile, too.
Right. Even Hathor, who protected the large chromis fish, was affected. So imagine the shock one day your sacred river, the source of everything, is flowing with blood.
Yeah, that would turn your world upside down. But here's something I don't quite get. Our sources mention that Pharaoh's magicians were able to duplicate this plague. So does that mean it wasn't as big a deal as it seems?
That's a really good question. It might seem like if the magicians could do it too, maybe it wasn't so supernatural after all.
Right.
But I think you have to consider the scale. The original plague affected the entire Nile for an entire week. The magicians might have been able to turn a small amount of water into blood, but they couldn't have replicated that kind of widespread devastation.
Okay, so maybe more like a parlor trick compared to the real thing.
Exactly. And the most important point is that despite seeing this incredible event, Pharaoh was still stubborn. He still refused to let the Israelites go.
Interesting. All right, so from blood, we move to something a little, well, a lot jumpier. A plague of, you guessed it, frogs. What can you tell us about this second plague?
Oh, the frogs. Well, according to the sources, it was like something out of a horror movie. They weren't just in the Nile, they were everywhere.
Everywhere.
I mean it. Covering the land, getting into people's houses, their food, a total inescapable infestation.
Ugh, sounds pretty awful. And is there a god in the spotlight this time?
Absolutely. Hecate, or Hecht as she's sometimes called, the frog-headed goddess of birth and resurrection. Talk about irony.
Yeah, a symbol of life and new beginnings turned into this nightmare.
It's like taking the positive associations of a deity and twisting them into something repulsive. And just like with the blood, the magicians were apparently able to copy this plague, at least to some extent.
But once again, Pharaoh changed his mind, right? He agreed to let the Israelites go, but as soon as the frogs were gone, he went back on his word.
A recurring theme, unfortunately.
So on to plague number 3, gnats, or maybe lice, depending on the translation.
Yeah, this one's interesting. Swarms of these tiny little pests popping up from the dust everywhere, biting people and animals, causing all kinds of irritation.
So maybe not as visually dramatic as a river of blood or thousands of frogs, but I bet it was still pretty miserable.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the constant itching, the discomfort, and the impact on hygiene. It would have been a breakdown of basic daily life.
And the god being targeted here.
Seems to be Geb, the god of the earth.
So if the very ground they worshipped was producing these nasty little bugs, what does that say about Geb's power?
Exactly. And here's another interesting detail from the sources. This plague was particularly humiliating for the Egyptian priests.
Why?
Well, they were known for being super clean, very strict about ritual purity. Imagine their horror at being covered in these bugs.
Yeah, I can see how that would be pretty upsetting. But there's a major difference with this plague, right? The magicians couldn't replicate it.
That's right. They even admitted this is the finger of God.
So a big turning point, a recognition that something beyond their power was at work. But of course, Pharaoh still wouldn't budge.
Sadly, his heart remained hardened.
Plague number 4 brings us to flies, and not just a few annoying ones, we're talking swarms.
Swarms is putting it mildly. These were huge, all-encompassing swarms that filled homes, ruined food, and basically made life in Egypt unbearable.
Beyond just being annoying, I imagine that would also spread disease, right?
Absolutely. And this time, the potential targets are Uatchit, a goddess sometimes depicted as an ichneumon fly, and Keper, the god associated with beetles and flies. It's like their supposed power over the insect world was being directly mocked.
And this is also the first time we see a clear distinction between the Israelites and the Egyptians.
That's right. The Israelites living in the land of Goshen were protected from this plague, which suggests a deliberate act of divine favoritism, or maybe judgment.
And how did Pharaoh react this time?
Well, he offered a compromise. He said the Israelites could worship within Egypt, but he still wouldn't let them leave.
And surprise, surprise, as soon as the flies disappeared, he went back on his word.
Sadly predictable.
So, on to plague number 5, which I imagine would have been pretty devastating for the Egyptian economy, the disease that killed all their livestock.
Absolutely devastating. Livestock were crucial for food, transportation, their whole way of life.
And I think this one really highlights how important animals were in Egyptian religion.
For sure. Think about Apis, the sacred bull, arguably their most important animal deity.
Right, and Hathor, the cow-headed goddess.
Exactly. You also have Menevis, another sacred bull, and Ta, whose sacred animal was also the Apis bull. So this plague seems to be directly challenging those central figures in their religious beliefs and practices.
And once again, the Israelites' livestock were completely unharmed.
Another clear distinction. But even after this huge economic and religious blow, Pharaoh remained stubbornly opposed to letting the Israelites go.
It's almost hard to believe. Plague number 6 brings us to a plague of boils.
This was a painful and widespread affliction, with boils breaking out on both people and animals. Imagine the suffering, the fear, the strain on their society.
And the potential targets here.
The deities associated with healing. Serapis, Isis, the goddess of healing and magic, and Imhotep, the deified physician. It seems their powers to cure and protect were utterly ineffective against this plague.
Even the magicians were affected, right?
They were so badly afflicted that they couldn't even appear before Moses. It's a testament to the severity of this plague.
And Pharaoh's reaction.
You guessed it, still defiant.
It's truly astounding. All right, plague number 7 unleashes a devastating hailstorm, but not just any hailstorm.
Right, this was a storm unlike anything the Egyptians had ever seen before. Hailstones, some of them mixed with fire, rained down from the sky, killing people and animals, destroying crops and trees.
What a terrifying event. And which gods might this have been targeting?
Well, first and foremost, Horus, the sky god and protector. Then there's Nut, the sky goddess, whose domain was directly impacted. And once again, we have Osiris as the god of vegetation because the crops were completely destroyed.
Their control over the elements seems to have failed spectacularly. Did this plague finally break Pharaoh?
He did briefly offer to let the people go, which suggests he might have been feeling the pressure. But, true to form, as soon as the hailstorm stopped, his stubbornness returned.
Back to square one. And then came plague number 8, locusts.
Enormous swarms of them descending on Egypt, devouring every single bit of vegetation that had somehow survived the hailstorm. This would have meant total agricultural ruin, a threat of famine, a devastating blow to their livelihood.
And yet again, Osiris, the god of vegetation, sees his domain completely ravaged. You'd think at this point, the message would be pretty clear.
It seems like it, right? And it's interesting to note that it was at this point that Pharaoh's own officials pleaded with him to let the Israelites go.
So even they recognize how dire the situation was.
Absolutely. But Pharaoh still hesitated. He initially offered to let the men go, but not the women, children, or livestock. This half-hearted attempt led to the full force of the locust plague. And then, once the locusts started swarming, he offered to let everyone go, only to harden his heart yet again when the plague ended.
It's amazing how resistant he was. And so, we come to the ninth plague, darkness.
This was a truly extraordinary event. Imagine. For 3 whole days, a thick, impenetrable darkness covered all of Egypt.
It's like something out of a nightmare.
Meanwhile, in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there was light. Just imagine the psychological impact of that contrast.
The sheer number of Egyptian gods associated with light who are challenged by this plague is staggering.
Right. You've got Ra, or Re, the primary sun god, Amun-Re, another sun god, Aten, the sun disk itself, Adam, the god of the setting sun, Khepri, or Kheper, who represents the morning sun, Horus, in his form as a winged sun disk, and even Thoth, the god associated with the moon and wisdom, to plunge their entire land into darkness. It was a direct attack on the most powerful forces in their cosmology.
So how did Pharaoh respond to this incredibly bold move?
Well, he finally offered to let the Israelites go, but with one condition. They had to leave their animals behind.
Still trying to bargain.
Moses refused, of course.
Yeah.
And this led to Pharaoh's final furious outburst. He banished Moses, swearing never to see him again.
Setting the stage for the final and most devastating plague. Before we wrap up, can you tell us a little bit about the 10th plague?
The 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, was a horrific event. Every firstborn son in every Egyptian household, along with the firstborn of their livestock, died in a single night.
A truly heartbreaking tragedy.
It was the culmination of all the previous plagues, a final, unavoidable judgment that broke Pharaoh's will and finally led to the Exodus.
So as we come to the end of this deep dive, it's clear that the 10 plagues weren't just some random series of natural disasters.
I think that's a key takeaway. Our sources really highlight the plagues as a deliberate, escalating demonstration of power by the God of the Israelites. And each plague seems to have been specifically chosen to undermine a particular Egyptian deity or belief.
Right from the Nile to fertility to insects, livestock, health, weather, even the very light from the sun and moon.
The plagues challenged the foundation of the Egyptian worldview and their entire society.
Absolutely. And this ancient story raises some really thought-provoking questions for us today. What does it tell us about the nature of belief, the ways power is used, and those moments in history that shake a society to its core?
And the impact of those events, not just on the Egyptians, but on the Israelites as well.
So much to think about. If you're interested in exploring this further, I'd recommend looking into the Egyptian gods we've discussed. Learning about their roles and significance will give you an even deeper understanding of this ancient conflict. It's a story that continues to resonate today.